Our hero Sushio is abruptly awakened by a persistent chime. He rises and rubs the drowsiness from his eyes, irritated by the clamor. He gazed around, bewildered, attempting to comprehend his location. It resembles a shadowy passage, but the surfaces are excessively supple with a fabric-like feel. He pursues the path out of the enigmatic area and is dazzled by the illumination at the opening. He could have plummeted to his demise had he advanced one further stride upon emergence. As Shu retreats, we observe that the puzzling spot he emerged from is the expanse beneath his covers. The precipice he nearly tumbled from was the mattress itself. For some peculiar, unexplained motive, he has diminished to 5 centimeters, roughly the size of a matchstick. His initial logical conclusion is that he is slumbering, but striking himself does not jolt him awake. He also perceives that he is completely nude. It's no surprise it's so cold. Luckily, he has some tissues on his mattress. For a certain reason we can't discuss, he uses them to fashion some trousers. Regarding that constant buzzing that roused him, it emanated from his phone alarm. Realizing he has a means to summon assistance, he dashes to the telephone, hits its home button, and notices it has 0 reception. That could be the situation, but he should still be capable of contacting 911 correct. He moves around the phone's display and inputs the emergency digits. He is so engrossed, and the number is so lengthy, that he unintentionally slides off the display and into the gap between his bed and nightstand. As he descends, he bemoans perishing in such a dreadful manner. His descent to the floor creates a faint thud and dislodges all the dust. It makes Sushao sputter for breath, but he seems all right. Due to his diminished size, his wind resistance has greatly risen. Like a small bug impervious to ground impact. Darkness prevails, and a strange sound hums around him. He heads for the fissure's opening, and the peculiar noise grows nearer. He sprints, dreading a hidden roach or something similar. When he emerges, the sound's origin appears. A darn praying mantis. Luckily, Sushao spots the hideous bug's shadow before its blade slashes down. He trips away from the assault, but his flimsy trousers are wrecked. The mantis pursues him relentlessly as he seeks refuge in his Crocs. Sandals through the Crocs' apertures. The bug's keen edge plays a twisted whack-a-mole game. It cuts Sushao's arms, then halts as he ponders if the danger has vanished. He glances sideways and spots the mantis entering the clogs. Luckily, his tiny form fits inside an opening, escaping unharmed and ensnaring the creature. Believing he's safe, he contemplates a refuge. But the praying mantis exits the aperture and pursues him relentlessly. He flees while scanning his vacant bedroom floor lacking cover. After sprinting a bit, he notices a spent mosquito coil and some matches. He rapidly rummages through the matchbox as the mantis nears and readies its claws. Before the pointed appendage can lacerate him, Sushio retrieves a matchstick from the box, strikes it against the flint, and ignites a flame to pierce the insect. Pokemon taught us fire incinerates bugs. Brandishing the torch, he challenges the mantis to round 2, but it retreats in defeat. Xia is now more prone to coldness, with a diminished physique. His next survival tactic is ripping fabric from his trousers and crafting a makeshift shirt to fight the chill. He only had himself to fault for leasing a vintage suburban home. Infested with bugs, Sushao grabs more matchsticks and rips off match striker sheets to create a fire-starting belt. The next issue is sustenance, fortunately. He has cookies left over by his bedside from yesterday, a location too elevated to reach. But he has no alternative. He requires nourishment to survive and prevent freezing. To combat rapid body heat loss, he conquers the insurmountable, utilizing his fan's power cord as a line. Upon arrival, his cookies are being carried away by an ant legion. Seeing him, they redirect their focus to Sushio. His match idea proves instantly useful. He uses the flame to ward off the annoying ants. He then grabs a nearby crumpled tissue, ignites it, and flings it towards the insects. A successful extermination mission, allowing him to snag some cookie pieces. But the ants return with greater ferocity. They swarm over him. He uses another match to fend them off and seeks refuge. The ants force him to the nightstand's edge. Sushao hurls the flaming match at the bugs, clutches the cookie crumb in his mouth, and utilizes the charging cord as a zip line. Aided by the final match, He successfully glides back to the bed as the ants withdraw. Those pests were simply safeguarding their meal, not planning a sushi dinner. Back at his phone's location, he contacts the neighboring landlord. He opens the voice memo app and begins documenting his frantic cries for assistance. He replays the audio over and over for an extended period, but it's fruitless. It has become dark. Now, as darkness descended, Su Xiao desires to utilize his phone's illumination to ward off nocturnal creatures. But he's already too late. A gigantic mosquito has attached itself to his back, feeding on his blood. So Xia panicked and swatted the mosquito. He turned and observed a swarming horde of bloodsuckers airborne. This resulted in another pursuit that he evaded. By returning beneath the cover and obstructing the opening, the mosquito bite instantly became painful and itchy. Moreover, there's minimal air beneath the cover, and he struggled to respire. He ripped more fabric from his garments and fashioned a mask to obtain some outside air. But the mosquitoes were relentless. Encamped outside the blanket without alternatives, Yahello chose to abandon the stifling blanket and flee. He made for his remaining matchstick by the phone. He ignited it and brandished the torch to ward off the insects. Shushu swung it a tad too vigorously, snapping the end with no flame to fend them off. The mosquitoes drained him like a complimentary blood bank. This couldn't persist. Shushu recalled that he possessed some mosquito coil somewhere. He rapidly spun to the bed's edge and leaped down, free running to the ground, anticipating the fall wouldn't injure him. And it didn't. His objective was the mosquito coil container. He snapped a small piece and ignited it with nearby matches. His audacious scheme worked. He should be secure, now correct. Incorrect. This guy got swindled and purchased counterfeit mosquito coils. The mosquitoes were more apprehensive of matchstick fire than the coil fumes. Su Xiao performed additional aerobic exercise and discovered himself in another furniture crack. The sound of mosquito buzzing was substituted with chirping. He assumed it was a rodent, but it was a juvenile lizard, targeted by the praying mantis. Su Xia aimed to destroy this hated insect permanently. He charged the bug with 2 torches. The mantis had remembered and instantly withdrew, seeing fire emerging from the crack. Only the small lizard and Su Xiao remained. The tiny creature immediately adored Su Xiao. He considered eliminating the small lizard, fearing a dangerous predator later. The little one evaded his stomp. At the final moment, he saw it wasn't dodging his attack. It targeted a nearby mosquito. The cute rescued baby lizard was a mosquito-killing expert. Repeatedly, it accurately targeted buzzing mosquitoes with its tongue. Su Xiao decided to retrieve the baby lizard. He fastened it with a cord and dragged the poor creature like a mobile bug repellent. Sushio had a pleasant dream that evening. He was enjoying a feast of tasty meals. But the dream was disrupted when the roasted pig began licking him. He discovered it was just a small reptile trying to rouse him. He's down to his last cookie morsel, nearly out of provisions. He shifted position and pondered how delicious a cooked reptile might be. But when he attempted to approach the creature stealthily, it charmed him with its cute actions. Sushio delayed his plan to consume the critter until it grew larger and called it Barbecue. Barbecue appreciated its new moniker. Moreover, Barbecue could perform neat feats. The small creature is quite clever. They were enjoying a game of catch the matchstick when Sushio's throat became parched from extreme thirst. To address this urgent issue, he returned to the nightstand using the charger cord. A glass of water was present. The ants remained. They must have detected Sushio and his companion's arrival. This time he stayed calm. He commanded Barbecue to attack the approaching horde. While the ants were engaged with Barbecue, Xia pulled the cookie sheet from its container. He needed hydration quickly. He utilized the tray as a stairway to ascend the glass. He shed his tissue garments. He submerged the tray to descend safely into the liquid. The strategy was dubious at best. It resulted in him plunging into the water. He began sinking helplessly into the glass. Would he perish by drowning in a drinking vessel? He couldn't depend on Barbecue for rescue. The small creature was occupied with the ants. He misjudged the tiny reptile. It courageously leaped into the liquid. Witnessing Su Xiao descending like himself, Barbecue fought to remain buoyant. Briefly, It appeared the numerous companions were nearing death by submersion. But Su Xiao rallied and saved Barbecue and himself. He expressed gratitude to his pal for providing the necessary impetus to persist living before diminishing to 5 centimeters. Su Xiao was merely an 18-year-old preparing for college. One morning he awakened and all was different. The chill, famine, and insects have rendered survival incredibly challenging. Today he attained the neighboring landlord's entrance. He slipped inside the door's crevice with his faithful lizard companion. He entered a commonplace area, and the proprietor was absent, so Xia deduced she might be asleep. He ascended the bedding. No one was present, but he detected a subtle cracking sound afar. He traversed the sheet covering until he inadvertently triggered a snare. It unleashed tiny wooden projectiles from all directions. Su Xiao evaded the incoming dangers successfully, mostly maintaining his balance to prevent setting off more tiny wooden projectile launchers. Unfortunately, Barbecue decided to cause trouble and activated all the remaining triggers. His best move was to lessen the incoming harm. Luckily, he escaped serious harm, but the tiny wooden projectiles pinned him to the earth. Initially, he believed the proprietor caused his reduction and was now teasing him. That notion was quickly disproven when another miniaturized person approached silently and placed a tiny wooden projectile against his neck. It was his proprietor, a girl named Li Shui. Both were reduced to 5 centimeters, and tissue was used for improvised clothing. When they relaxed and put down their weapons, Li Shui clarified the traps were for rodents. They're facing the same obstacle. Li Shu was raised in this building, and she had never run into significant trouble, but they share nothing in common, except living in the same structure and becoming smaller, because she had bigger priorities, like resetting the rodent traps. Li Shu left Su Xiao. He hoped to assist her with the trap setup, and she didn't object. They went to the bed center and fixed the mouse deterrents, so Xiao blundered a little. But it's fine, he wanted to organize a rescue signal. But she prioritized staying alive and gathering supplies, since she couldn't afford to feed another person. Suddenly, Barbecue chirped at something up ahead. It was a bug that had wandered onto the bed. Su Xia aimed to demonstrate his usefulness, but Li Shui was already charging toward the insect. With her tiny spear, she navigated the stationary bug and delivered a fatal blow to its back. They're good on protein for a bit. With bug meat, the two hauled their prize. When the insects noticed them, the night was peaceful in Suxia's shabby tent. He awoke around 6:30 a.m. The host offered some bug meat last night. He'd find his own meal today. He showed he wasn't a mooch. Using the bug shell, he gathered water by the barriers and proudly gave it to Li Shui. But she said the moisture on the security fences was tainted and could cause illness. Being sick now meant death. His other plan was to grab stuff from his room. Les Ho joined him to gather supplies. Suso knew he had half a glass of pure water on his nightstand. Upon arrival, the cup was overturned and the liquid spilled. Even the match container he relied on was destroyed. They returned to Li Shu's quarters, as Shu Hua bemoaned the tampering of his belongings. There wasn't a moment to spare for annoyance, as something just brushed against the snares. The critter had emerged. The rodent shed anticipated reached the cot. They both understood their remaining provisions must be protected. Their tasks were evident. Lizhu would address the rat, and Su Xiao would safeguard the food. With her flawless agility, she successfully engaged the rat and captured its focus. She could have escaped were it not for its extended tail. The tail strike propelled her from the bed. Su Xiao, conversely, proceeded sprinting with the provisions. He guided the rat towards the tripwires. They instantly released the toothpick projectiles, embedding themselves in the vermin. The rodent was compelled to withdraw, as Su Xiao gained a moment to pause and catch his breath. He circled the area calling for Li Shui. Fortunately, she emerged from that blow unscathed. Today was challenging. The landlady was shifting her demeanor, as she readily offered her renter sustenance to recover. They anticipated the rodent would return, and their provisions wouldn't suffice. They had to prepare and find external aid. They had to alert the outside world. The pair took a thorough inventory of their available gear and resources. They required a new sanctuary to prevent another rodent attack. A notion entered Sasheo's thoughts. A cabinet compartment could be ideal concealment. The sole issue would be the nighttime temperature decrease. But he guaranteed Li Shu he had a solution. First, they rummaged through the beetle's remains. They consumed its limbs. They were fortunate to discover their objective. while it remained undamaged. He utilized the leg's sharpness to slice open some cushions, revealing the stuffing within. They gathered as much filling as possible and placed the bounty inside the compartment. They secured enough to create some bedding. Regarding the surplus stuffing they acquired, they could craft something different. Su Xiao carefully snapped a small piece of his beetle limb and pierced an opening with it. They essentially possessed a needle. He meticulously strung some cotton fibers and prepared to display his stitching abilities. With each pass of the needle, the string trailed until Su Xiao completed a top. He even fashioned some trousers from the cushion covers, and not to mention undergarments. The following item he desired to create was a necessary garment. A warm outer layer. He assuredly concentrated on the current task, and the coat was completed. Su Xiao was finished, and he could finally shed his flimsy attire. He ridiculed the landlord for her sluggish stitching. When he was already done with his garments, Lisa was unfazed. She just meticulously continued sewing. When she turned after detecting a shuffle, she spotted Su Xiao donned in the outfit he was so vain about, resembling a child's crude sketch. His sloppy craftsmanship showed when the coat seemed split. He wore an extremely brief tank top beneath. His pant legs were uneven. Most embarrassingly, his underwear was excessively constricting. He had to suppress his ego and reconstruct the entire ensemble. Today was dedicated to garment creation until sunset. Leisure looked stylish with her complete handmade outfit. So did Sushia after he dedicated himself to doing it properly. With these new cozy garments, they could likely venture beyond the coziness of the bed. For the moment, they had to return to their dwelling to purify some contaminated water for drinking and remain optimistic for the future. They intend to head to the terrace to create a noticeable plea for assistance. But the evening would not remain tranquil, as Sasheo's slumber was disrupted by a shriek. He was certain it was a human sound. On the fourth day, Su Xiao mentioned the noise he had detected the previous evening. He was unaware of its origin, but he knew it was close. They couldn't disregard potential hints, so Li Wei desired to examine immediately. Ascending near the casement, the pair retrieved the writing implements they had readied to compose a distress message. After completing this SOS beacon, it was time to depart once more. They embarked. It required some time, approximately half a day. They hadn't anticipated the journey from the sleeping quarters to the terrace would be so challenging. Beneath the barriers, they chose to rest after the ascent. A tough climb for the pair. Easy for Barbecue. The small critter reached the top first. Tiny Barbecue chirped frantically, and Lishui quickly readied her hair bow. The baby reptile was excited about a spiderweb. Seeing no immediate danger, Lishui continued onward. They reached the terrace, where the plants sat. Sunbathing was visually appealing, and the moisture on their foliage provided a crucial water source. Next, they had to display the banners, hoping for rescue before their final matches burned out. Su Xiao finished the job swiftly, but with no movement nearby. Rescue seemed unlikely. Nobody walked past all day. After a futile attempt, Li Shu wished to conclude for the day and return with a fresh approach tomorrow. But Su Xia held firm. He hoped to observe potential nighttime human presence. He guaranteed one he would avoid recklessness. Everything would be all right. They formulated a swift entry and exit strategy for the balcony, utilizing a vacant water container. The pair fastened the container with a cord and employed its mass as a counterweight to descend. This vacant container secured itself within the elevated balcony, granting the pair a minor victory. Li Shu commended his unforeseen ingenuity. That acclaim was almost lost due to his inability to unseal the vacant container. Luckily, he conceived the notion to scorch a small aperture into the container, allowing concealment. The pair collected desiccated foliage, planning to utilize their penultimate matchstick. But match depletion shouldn't pose a significant issue, considering the lattice survival aptitude. The two constructed a fairly suitable makeshift camp within the plastic container. She was adamant about also sleeping on the porch tonight to observe what was happening, but Su Xia was simply delighted to share another evening with the lovely woman once more. Their fire was drawing insects, but that very fire allowed a warm outdoor dinner. Surveying the area, Li Shui noticed no illumination nearby. Unwilling to accept the absence of others, Su Zio glanced at the activity. The pair exchanged looks as if they'd discovered treasure. While posing the identical inquiry, The night light rekindled all Su Shua's rescue aspirations. He was so overwhelmed that he unknowingly embraced the property owner. Immobilized by darkness, a busy day awaited them. Their final chance, a perilous gamble. What existed past the illumination in that specific pain remained an enigma. That evening, Su Xiao experienced an equally puzzling vision, where he grasped for a luminous citrus, while enticed by a mesmerizing tone from the adjacent edifice. He was jolted awake by Li Shui, gesturing towards the exterior of their encampment. The outline of a rodent was meandering near the plastic container, and it was larger than the previous one they confronted. They couldn't surrender now. They had to depart, or they'd exhaust provisions and perish exiting the container. After the rodent lost curiosity, the company proceeded and observed a planted vessel with a recognizable fruit sprouting. It was the citrus he had envisioned earlier. They ascended the container, intending to acquire some delectable fruit. Su Xiao wasn't a proficient climber, so Li Shui assumed control. She dislodged the fruit, and he remained grounded to retrieve it. They excavated using the beetle blade, and the tangy citrus aroma made their mouths water. They divided it evenly, and even Barbecue received a portion. The tiny lizard was initially reluctant, but he ultimately enjoyed it. He relished it so much he desired more. Observing its safety for consumption, they commenced slicing the fruit. They savored the fresh nectar, while Barbecue was tasked with discarding the rind. This impromptu meal of theirs garnered the attention of the wandering rodent from before. It intruded upon the scene, and the group had to rapidly adopt a combat stance. Sous Chef intended to assault the rat with his toothpick lance, but he didn't anticipate leaping so high. He descended behind the rat's head and pierced the spear directly into its neck. It enraged the pest, but it lacked the opportunity to strike back. A tiny projectile pierced one of its eyes. The rodent convulsed in agony, tumbling from the ledge. The crew was fortunate the rat plummeted, and Suja felt stronger than normal. As the potted flora began to wilt, the pair felt their sight and power amplify. Maybe these strange occurrences originated from ingesting the fruit. Nevertheless, a more resilient physique would greatly boost their odds of making it. They chose to return to the cooking area for additional provisions. Prior to departing in such a spacious culinary space, their only finding was salt in a small sack. Observing the balcony's height from the earth, Su Xiao reconsidered their expedition to the outer realm. Li Shui, conversely, was descending the cord like it was effortless. After reaching a sufficient depth, they utilized the wall's abundant vegetation for stability. Li Shui established their objective to arrive before nightfall, the peach tree within the grove. They rapidly reached the remains of the deceased rodent and commenced extracting some rat flesh. They clearly couldn't carry everything. Thus much rat flesh was squandered. Now that they're exposed to the natural world, the true challenge commences. It didn't require much time for the team to find their rhythm in pursuing quarry. This instance involved numerous dark insects they diligently corralled. Lai Ji oversaw butchering their game and reminding Susho to recover their scarce armaments. It's approximately midday now, therefore it's time for a brief respite. Once they navigated the dense prairie, a visage with sunken eyes emerged unexpectedly. Li Shu briefly felt alarmed, but recognized it was merely the head of a plaything. Despite that fright, they chose to encamp in the adjacent clearing. Barbecue appeared disturbed for some unknown reason, but today they will enjoy a substantial meal, composed of assorted insect limbs and rodent flesh. Amazing, they ignited a flame using timber as the final ember. Must be reserved for dire situations. Sadly for them, the tiny blaze they created to prepare their meal appeared to have lured an unwanted guest. All is prepared and set to be consumed, but a feral serpent revealed its menacing presence. It struck at the party unannounced. The crew narrowly escaped. Then the flight began another grueling pursuit on famished bellies. But they can't continue fleeing. Serpents possess a sharp olfactory sense, and they will pursue them relentlessly if necessary. So their plan was to conceal themselves individually and seek chances to strike and eliminate. Once the viper neared Su Shua's hiding spot, tiny projectiles began piercing the creature repeatedly. When it shifted its focus to the assailant, Su Shua seized the moment to launch his own attack. He plunged the lance in his grasp into the serpent's flesh. As far as possible, the issue was He plunged it so profoundly it became lodged. That brief alarm allowed the serpent to coil around him completely. When it prepared to devour Suso, Barbecue came to his aid and chomped on the serpent with all his might. It provided enough time for Li Jiao to intervene. She drifted through the leaves and leaped down to jab a splinter into the serpent's eye. The serpent swiftly withdrew with its grievous injuries. Li Shuai reprimanded Su Xiao for faltering when they had to act fast to endure. Li Shuai's demeanor might appear harsh, but she simply doesn't want her companions to perish due to carelessness. Utilizing Barbecue's keen sense of scent, the small reptile guided them into the fractured doll's cranium. There were serpent eggs within. It was likely the serpent's lair. Li Jue cautiously examined the surroundings and discovered something unsettling. Beneath the withered foliage lay a tiny antique boot, something suitable for a miniature person. This raised the prospect of others having diminished in size. Besides the footwear, there were no other clues. Well, Su Xiao planned to utilize Barbecue's scent tracking abilities. The quest brought them beyond the eerie fractured doll's face. The small reptile guided them to a location behind dense vegetation. Within they observed what resembled a pale human appendage, but it was merely another plaything. The serpent must have pilfered the toy's garments and footwear to enhance its nest comfort. Fortunately, the incident with the viper didn't stray far from their route, so they remained on course to arrive at the peach tree. Before sunset, they had already established camp amongst the tree's limbs. It had been an arduous day, and a challenging night might lie ahead, when it was Su Xiao's vigil to safeguard against unexpected events. He drifted off into a profound slumber. He envisioned the illumination on the adjacent edifice once more. His reverie was again disrupted by Barbecue's constant chirping. It proved to be for a valid reason. As a shadowy, humanoid form attempted to stealthily infiltrate Li Shu's tent. When Su Xiao shouted to warn his companion, the figure pivoted and chuckled mischievously. He endeavored to hurl a spear at the trespasser, but it evaded and skillfully ascended the peach tree. Barbecue wasn't going to allow this individual to escape. He was going to pursue as the small reptile tracked the shadowy figure. Su Xiao checked on his comrade. She was non-responsive, so he drew nearer. Su Xiao recoiled in terror. The individual within the tent wasn't Li Shuai. It was another one of those shadowy figures who was mocking him. Then the second trespasser lunged at him like a feral beast. He responded instinctively and propelled the stranger from the tent and onto the earth. This wasn't the moment to understand things. He had to relax and locate his partner. Susha carefully circled the zone, saying Li Shuai's name, when an object plummeted from above into his grasp. It was Barbecue. They truly needed to discover Li Shuai, and Barbecue seemed to have a notion where she might be. That's a clever little lizard. They ascended to the upper limbs, with Shu struggling greatly. But at the peak was a gal, staring straight at the structure's illumination. She appeared to desire to feel the light's heat, but Shu's shout disrupted her. When Li Shu rotated to spot her companion, it seemed as if she just exited a daze. Her final memory was a bizarre vision of light, beckoning her the identical peculiar vision Sushio experienced. They were clueless about what was occurring, but light signified individuals and individuals signified assistance. He informed her about the darkness that assaulted their sight. Those shades were after their provisions. They pilfered everything the crew possessed. Luckily, they had Barbecue's keen nose to trail the trespassers. Seeing those scoundrels were below, Xiao wanted to leap into the fray. But Li Chui cautioned against wandering the surface at night because of the numerous hazards there. Their wisest course was to delay action until morning and prioritize safety. For now, they could restock supplies as required. The night concluded uneventfully. Barbecue still recalled the culprit's aroma. They crossed the land veiled in morning mist. Heavy dew dampened their attire. After trekking for some time, they discovered some markings. It guided them to a tetrapod domain. Carefulness was paramount, cautiously parting the foliage. They noticed a temporary shelter crafted from branches and leaves. Within the shelter lay their knapsacks, gear, and provisions. Li Chu desired a closer inspection of the encampment. They ascended the pavilion behind the foliage rooftop. A foul odor permeated. When Li Chu brushed aside the leaves, flies erupted from within. With the all clear, the group chose to enter the concealed upper chamber. Inside lay a deceased individual missing a left arm and leg. Evidence of bandages remained. The unfortunate soul perished from significant blood loss. It was puzzling why these shadowy entities would conceal a corpse. Thorny vines covered the walls. An inscription was etched into them. The note simply stated more than just traps. The squad was baffled by the message. Li Shu sensed observation from something concealed amidst the foliage. She rapidly removed the covering and subdued the lurking figure. Sushio ensured we got some smack talk in. As the fella tumbled from the pavilion's top, the fog remained dense, and the pair relied solely on barbecue snout to locate the phantoms. After going a sufficient distance, the hidden figures attempted to ambush Li Chui. She quickly discarded her bow and engaged in close combat with the attacker opposite. So Xiao atoned by tackling the other shadow. He rapidly immobilized the thug's arms, while subduing the foe with his own weight. When he finally saw the individual he assaulted, he realized it was a lady. I couldn't determine if that made him gentler, or the contrary of gentler. But everyone's focus quickly changed to barbecues. Tweets the little critter was signaling toward the outline of two individuals past the mist. The figures in question were simply a pair of wayfarers, identical to Sushia and his lessor. Luckily, the squad had already captured, bound, and silenced the specters. Leech told Sushia to exit and investigate the individuals behind the mist. He appeared from the vegetation with a welcoming grin, appearing as innocuous as possible. The wayfarers seemed pleased to encounter another person. Thankfully, the restrained offenders didn't disturb the voyagers, although Barbecue remained wary of the azure-haired outlanders. Their monikers were Chin Lu and Chin Yong. Like our group, they had rested in the woods overnight and had their belongings pilfered en route to the structure's illumination. Along the path, they discovered edible plant roots for a rapid repast. The enigmatic pilferers were peculiar. They continuously chattered about barring access to the radiance. It was logical they purloined the travelers' provisions. They were hindering further progress. Thus, the alliance of two groups secured the crazies in a relatively secure location, where they couldn't meddle any longer. Luckily, Chin Lu was a skilled navigator, expediting and easing the trip. Su Xiao was just engaging in playful conversation while showing the way. When he overlooked the descending incline he was treading on, he uttered a warning yell. But it was too late. Li Shui was plummeting too. She was plunging because Chin Lu and Xin Yang purposely shoved her off the precipice. At the base of the bluff, all four of them were attempting to reorient themselves. Qin Yang repeatedly expressed remorse for instigating this entire event. Now that they were stuck at the bottom of a moist ravine, the priority was to get warm. However, it appeared the azure-haired voyagers weren't fazed by the chill. Lucian wondered how these two overlooked this chasm. When they asserted knowing the terrain, as she rotated, she noticed an injury on Xin Yang's shoulder, oozing azure blood. The shady wayfarer quickly concealed it. Su Xiao chimed in that reaching dry land was paramount. Li Guang anxiously told her comrade what she witnessed, but Su Xiao believed his landlord was simply mistaken. To eliminate any uncertainty, he went to Qin Yong to have her reveal her shoulder. The lass uncovered her shoulder. Neither injuries nor cerulean blood were visible. Qin Yong even wept, feeling insulted by the absurd allegation. Afterward, the two parties kept their space. Li Shui clung to her observation. Su Xiao just yearned for warmth swiftly. They lacked time for supernatural musings. Unbeknownst to him, those paranormal ideas might hold validity. Let's pause the tale and explore Barbecue's origins. He originated from a solitary lizard egg abandoned by its keeper. Upon emergence, the small reptile already possessed a glimmer of awe. He observed everything with inquisitiveness and a grin. That's when he encountered the frenzied rodent on the lower level. Barbecue ultimately found himself outside the enclosure and in the external realm, where marvels and terrors were boundless. He could have perished numerous times, but he always stumbled upon security. His escapades guided him to the gap between Shu's bed and bedside table. Fortunately for Barbecue, this location was a feast of irritating mosquitoes. He was relishing his personal insect selection when a larger insect intervened. The praying mantis in that moment. Demise felt nearer than ever, until the warmth increased and the mantis's face was abruptly ablaze. It was the occasion that Barbecue encountered his owner. Sushia Lishua was still holding uncertainties about the voyagers trailing behind them. In the meantime, Sushia began to crumble from the plummeting temperature as they journeyed through the soggy canal. But Li Shuai believed this was something more than the chill. Something lurked in the water they needed to escape. Fortunately, she hauled her companion onto a patch of muck. Su Xiao couldn't sense his legs, due to a leech sucking his blood. It was fortunate they had salt to cause the leech to writhe, detaching from Su's house leg. They had to settle in this muck patch. At that instant, Qin Lu and Qin Yong rejoined them, and Su's Ho invited them to gather around the campfire. While he relaxed with his wounded leg, Lu Shu was pursuing a toad for dinner. Learning Su's Ho was isolated and defenseless, Chinying shed her innocent facade and pounced on Su's Ho to strangle him. Unexpectedly, Su Xiao rose effortlessly and began choking Qin Yang. Barbecue reciprocated by clamping down on Qin Lao's leg. Once the betrayer was restrained, Li Shuai's projectiles whizzed through the air. Qin Lu evaded the oncoming assault, but was felled by a single subsequent kick, and so another pair of outsiders were captured and bound. Qin Yang was perplexed about how Shu could move despite being supposedly gravely wounded, but the man was merely a skilled performer. The leech wound was insignificant. The frigid temperature was the primary adversary in this location. So Shu and Li Shuai had faith in one another and possessed the intelligence to apprehend the dubious wayfarers. The route they chose, the impact to tumble to the precipice and barbecues. Skepticism above all else. The enigmatic azure blood. Lyko insisted on knowing the true identities of these Qins and their objectives. Chun Yong chuckled and recognized the duo's competence, but bemoaned that escape was now impossible. Su Xiao restrained Li Shuai and encouraged her to stay focused and abandon the betrayers. Then dark tentacles erupted from the water. This was Xin Yang's moment. Diminished humans with azure hair that resembled exact replicas of the Qin associates appeared from the water in their ragged garments. They materialized two at once, and their quantity multiplied rapidly. Su Xiao and Li Shuai positioned themselves back to back, prepared to defend. They had to withstand the onslaught of mysterious duplicates. The pair displayed a remarkable defense, repelling copies left and right with their tiny weapons. But these entities continuously revived and reappeared. Their behavior implied they weren't intending to eliminate Su Xiao. Devised a plan to compel the copies back and create a chance for retreat. He pointed his toothpick's end at his own throat and vowed self-harm if the duplicates didn't retreat. The copies weren't convinced, but they couldn't chance Su Xiao injuring himself. The opening this ruse created was sufficient to propel Li Ju from danger. She clung near the trench's edge, but Su Xia was abandoned to the copy's abduction. He awoke completely unclothed, with an aching head and intense illumination. He glanced back and noticed a strange conduit fixed to his nape. He ripped it free and donned his coat. The ground consisted of squirming vines, and Barbecue was ensnared. As he rushed toward the small reptile, a bear youth obstructed him. It was Sushio's exact replica, and there were numerous. Bewildered and frightened, Sushio fled. But with each turn, more duplicates materialized rapidly. He was brutally pummeling the copies, exposing their azure blood. He clawed his way out of that abyss with relentless determination and arrived at a precipice. The sounds of his eerie stalkers closing in was sufficient impetus to steel himself and leap to a nearby foliage. Some of the duplicates didn't care to see past the threshold and plummeted into infinite obscurity. Sosha seized the chance to ascend back to the top. If he was capable, his replicas were as well. So when one of his imitations gained ground, he ruthlessly shoved the imbecile into the chasm. Sosha's sole focus was to locate and ensure Li Shuai's well-being, so they could organize a rescue operation for Barbecue. The pair were swiftly reunited. Li Shu was so distressed she instantly embraced him firmly. The moment they saw one another, when she recognized she'd been clinging on for an uncomfortable. After a while, she pushed Su Xiao aside and inquired about the barbecue's location. Daylight would fade in 4 hours. 4 hours to save their reptile companion. The pair descended to the opening Su Xia emerged from. They successfully infiltrated the bizarre subterranean facility. Not a single sentinel was on duty. The cramped passages offered safety from potential ambushes. Their journey into the tunnel's depths was unsettling. Yet safe, they arrived at the eerie chamber where he had awakened. Barbecue was nowhere in sight. They witnessed more duplicates emerging from damp containers. They attempted escape, but were swiftly encircled. As they fought duplicates to clear a path, another Sushao in a white top appeared, different from the duplicates. This one seemed truly worried about Li Shui's well-being. She instantly pointed her toothpick at this questionable white shirt outerwear. Sushao also observed this white shirt imposter was behaving oddly. The pale top began questioning his authenticity, but he denied the possibility of fabricated recollections. So he approached Coat and utilized the toothpick's point to pierce his skin. Crimson liquid erupted, certain of his genuineness. The fair shirt Sushao inquired of Coat. Coat performed identically, but his injury oozed azure. The vision of the sapphire fluid emanating from his flesh triggered his initial remembrance of exiting the capsule. From the outset, Coat was preordained to return Li Shui to this location. His entire perspective disintegrated. Any individual would experience similarly upon discovering their replicated nature. The genuine pair performed their forte. They fled. They had to recover barbecue and depart via the narrow cavern opening. However, the replicas commenced maximizing efforts to impede their escape. The duplicates were persistent and unwavering. They were a powerful duo. In the meantime, Jacket, Sushao conversed with the tendril monster's mind that spawned the subterranean copies. The Jacket was deemed an apex of intellect and might a suitable instrument for the monster's desires. Jacket's directive was to terminate the primary Sushao, to endure as the genuine one Liho. Alternatively, could be a model for a superior copy. When Jacket observed Li Chu writhing in agony, he attempted to implore the monster mind to release his companion, but it simply persisted, readying the duplication procedure. Jacket chuckled as he grasped a toothpick lance and lunged at the impassive mind monster. As a replica, he would vanish if the mind perished. Jacket Sushao already understood that. Yet he nevertheless thrust the toothpick further into the mind. He held the conviction that copies shouldn't have been conceived. The mind's parting words were a caution for the imminent apocalypse. Jacket inched his way to Leech. Long before he and the other replicas embraced Mutt, he simply desired a final glimpse of her, before the passageways crumbled. The actual Sushao awakened with barbecue and Li Shui, observing him with worried expressions. She explained how they escaped. Due to a lone copy sacrificing itself. Nightfall approached. They needed shelter quickly. The climate was awful. Fierce gusts made the prairie sway wildly. Fortunately, they found an empty open container ahead. They hurried toward it. Barbecue leaped into Sushao's embrace, fearing the thunder as rain began falling. Every drop could severely harm a miniaturized individual. Sushao got struck by a single drop, and Li Wei pulled him the remainder of the way. As fate decided, their chosen sanctuary already housed an occupant. They had no other place to go. Sushia believed they could overcome this. As usual, he secured a cord around Barbecue's frame and assigned the small companion to delve further into the darkness and signal at the initial indication of danger. Barbecue courageously proceeded. When the tweeting commenced, Su Zio swiftly tugged the cord back, forcing the creature inside the container to labor for its expected meal. It was a lizard type. After retrieving it, Li Shui began firing toothpick projectiles that made the creature uneasy. This reptile appeared rather bumpy, and it was incredibly hostile with its attacks. It took Li Shui several more attempts, but she effectively lodged an arrow that halted the creature's motion, eliminating it. The formidable landlady boldly advanced to complete the task by driving a toothpick into the reptile's mind. The perpetually inquisitive Barbecue desired to feel the fungal growths on the reptile's skin, but Sushao intervened just in time. Upon expiring, the fungal masses in the creature's carcass proliferated at an unparalleled pace. Observing the unusual expansion wasn't targeting them, Lysu desired to ignite a blaze to incinerate the fungus. After establishing camp, Lysu disrobed and requested Susho examine the injury on her back. He approached to inspect and noticed no serious injuries, merely remnants of desiccated azure blood. Sushia was astonished and inquired if Li Shui was duplicated. As she restrained him, Sushia lamented her lack of caution. He couldn't defeat her or flee. There was no option in answer to his inquiry. Li Shui simply instructed him to raise his shirt. The two momentarily composed themselves. As she warmed a beetle blade, she swiftly cut her hand, allowing the crimson blood to flow, demonstrating her authenticity. The strange thing was, the injury healed remarkably fast. The brain creature injected their bodies with something, creating the copies she speculated. It was a material that prolonged their lives. Another issue was its bumpy head. The mushrooms left unattended were multiplying. Covered in red spots, it was time to incinerate them. Awakening Sushia fought to stay aware. He couldn't afford to let her go. As crimson spores filled the air spectacularly, the group collapsed when the contamination dissipated. Susa awoke. Their unconsciousness was brief. Breathing in the particles must have been responsible. Going further into the hollow shell, they found more decayed bodies. Surrounded by excessive fungal expansion, they retreated gradually. Luckily, another burst of spores didn't happen. Igniting those masses was a mistake. The precipitation was subsiding outside, and leaving it famished at daybreak would be perfect. Su Xiao impaled some gastropods on his toothpick to grill over the flames. Li Shu began to question their continued journey, to proceed or not. Countless unforeseen and erratic factors existed. Their anxieties were relegated. As the grill beeped like an alarm, the pair swiftly equipped themselves and spotted two cloaked individuals approaching. The masked duo kept running, completely ignoring them. Behind them, a wild feline was on the hunt. Therefore, Shirao and Li Shui were entangled in a huge predicament. By outsiders, the ferocious cat growled at the cluster. Shirao subtly gestured to Li Shui. She drew her bow, and he cautioned the strangers to inhale. Her objective was the unusual fungal expansion beside. It burst open, scattering spores throughout the container. It worked well in hindering the wild feline, but despite breathing in numerous mysterious spores, the stray still had enough awareness to strike luckily. Shu Xiao reacted quickly, delivering a kick to its face. He was knocked to the ground in response, pinned by the feline's paw, its claws piercing his chest. When Les Ho attempted to aid him, she also sustained a deep scratch on her back. At least Su Xiao had escaped the paw hold to try and save the descending landlord. But the cat's unpredictable actions knocked him off the container. Things had become so frantic that he was nearly crushed by their makeshift shelter. Just when he believed he was out of danger, he noticed the cat's paw descending toward his head. He evaded it just in time, but being pursued like this was tiring. Sushio was badly hurt, her back dripping blood from the gaping laceration. The feline had lost its fascination with the small humans. Lisue required immediate medical attention. The newcomers were assigned to gather kindling, while Sushio embraced his companion for warmth. They heated water and rebuilt the encampment. The strangers identified themselves as Jiang Feng and Qian Xian. Jiang Feng offered Su Xiao some plant residue to staunch his partner's hemorrhage. As Li Shui tossed her flaming brand into the mounds, they erupted, dispersing scarlet powdery barbs. Like him, Barbecue was deeply worried about Li Shui. Fortunately, the pragmatic Li Shui had returned. She reprimanded her teammate for the embrace and commanded him to keep her off the earth. Some stitching needles remained in their knapsack. They could utilize hair singed in hot water as filament to mend the lesion. His sole task was to assist her unite the edges of the dorsal laceration, and allow the enigmatic restorative power handle the remainder. For a novice seamstress, Su Zio did a remarkable job with the entire task. By the fire, that guy Chen Xi doubted such a technique would be effective. Su Zio cleansed the injury and cautioned Li Shui the next phase would be excruciating. She endured the agony as Su Xiao meticulously sutured the laceration. It required some time to complete the stitching, enough time for the flames to extinguish. Su Xiao was utterly drained, but he grew concerned when Li Shui became unresponsive. But her respiration continued and her temperature subsided. She had simply fainted. Now Su Xiao needed to address his own serious injury. His remedy was to pack earth into his chest wound. He bound his wounds and rested beside Li Shui. It was fitting that the unfamiliar pair should keep watch overnight, just to be safe. Su Xiao discreetly assigned Barbecue to watch their visitors. Xin Qian acknowledged the pair was formidable, but with their wounds, healing would be challenging. They could simply grab all their valuable possessions, like the paperclip, bow, and provisions. Cheng Feng disliked that notion. Qinshin declined to accept accountability for attracting the feline there, asserting they lacked alternatives. He simply didn't want to squander good items when it was easily accessible. Once his watch duty began while others slumbered, Chun-Shin instantly commenced his heist, even booting Barbecue away meanwhile, as the tiny lizard attempted to intervene. Then the jerk grabbed a toothpick projectile, placed it in the bow, and pointed it at Barbecue. That's when Li Shuai awakened. Her voice startled Qinxuan, and the idiot's hand slipped, launching the projectile at the slumbering Su Xiao. Luckily, Li Shuai possessed lightning reflexes and snatched the toothpick mid-flight. Qinxuan attempted to wiggle out of his mischief, and she throttled him in return. Due to her incredible power, nobody would suspect she was badly injured. The previous day, Shin Feng awoke to the ruckus and rushed to Chen Xiangxin's aid. Su's house sleep was also interrupted by the sounds of combat. He was preoccupied with Li Shu's recuperation. This confirmed they possessed remarkable healing capabilities. The transgression of pilfering their belongings at night was severe. But when Barbecue informed him, the jerk struck him. Susheo's demeanor turned serious. That beetle-browed, wide-eyed fool actually attempted to swipe their possessions and harass their companion. Chun-Shin fumbled his words, claiming he was merely testing the bow and arrows. Sushu only meant to scare the man. Lisa was astonished that Susha grasped what Barbecue uttered. The little fellow was growing wiser by the day. Emerging from the shadows, a fresh dawn broke in a submerged meadow of towering blades. Catching a beetle was now child's play. These newcomers were also journey toward the illumination. The deluge would remain for 90 minutes more, but they had to depart. Zhang Feng attempted to share some beetle flesh with the spiteful Chenxian, but the jerk bluntly declined. He desired to take a position and refused to accept anything acquired by the jacket pair. But his rumbling belly contradicted his statement. After satisfying their hunger, Li Zui oversaw the retreat from the inundated zone. Chen Xian, the timid soul, objected to the notion of utilizing grass as a route, fearful of plunging into the depths. Zhang Feng didn't hesitate to abandon him and join the powerful pair, scared and solitary inside the container. Qinxin suppressed his ego and did the same. Additional people equal increased complications, but they could handle it, yeah. Plus, Su Xiao just made a fantastic discovery. A bit of styrofoam drifting on the surface. After ensuring its security, everybody got on their makeshift vessel. Mending their injuries depleted considerable energy, so they must locate suitable nourishment ashore. Su Xiao opted to ascend back to the stems. Noticing insects prowling nearby, he located a cluster of aphids. They could consume these directly or drink their sweet honeydew. He retrieved a full sack of these aphids, but his return to the boat was disrupted by another mantis. Asura utilizing Li Shui's protectiva barrage, he swiftly incapacitated and plunged the aggressor into the water. Su Xiao reassured his companion everything was fine, but some squirming dark worms were moving behind him. These creepy creatures squeezing him were nematomorpha. They emerged from the deceased mantis carcass, apparently attempting to control Su Xiao. Lai Ji came to the rescue, slicing the vermin with the beetle blade. Noticing more worms in the water, Chun Xian freaked out again and started paddling. Without waiting for the powerful pair, the jerk was so inconsiderate that he attempted to push Jiang Feng overboard. For trying to halt him, Su Xiao reacted swiftly, grabbing the woman Li Shu as well, hopped in the vessel, and swiftly put the good-for-nothing guy in a headlock, menacing to toss him in the bug-filled water. Ultimately, they let the jerk live, but assigned him as their designated oarsman. So Xia brought out the bugs he gathered to distribute the peculiar, sugary delight when the gals sampled it. They were astonished by the sweetness of the bug juice. Su Xiao failed to mention they were consuming droppings. That definitely spoiled the confection, but he maintained that bug waste is edible, since their nourishment is exclusively plant liquid. Su Xiao observed they were moving excessively quickly, and it wasn't due to Qinshin's paddling. The current itself was pulling the craft. This indicated only one possibility. They were approaching a cascade. Noticing the precipitous descent, Qinshin instantly began informing them that the crew should have heeded him and awaited the water's evaporation. No going back now. Li Shu aimed to leap onto the grass ahead and sever it, allowing everyone to hold on. Her actions were swift and expert, ascending the grass blade effortlessly while gripping a blade. Reaching the midpoint, she began slicing the stalk's body. The other survivors felt a surge of panic, but Su Xiao simply advised them to have faith in the proprietor. The grass stalk was ultimately felled, and he guided the other two toward the tip. They all leaped in the nick of time, permitting the vessel to descend the cascade. Jensen attempted to dissuade Yongfang from joining these two exceptional individuals once more, but she possessed intelligence, and the sensible decision was to remain with powerful companions. Sushu couldn't resist consuming the aphids from his sack. He started to realize there was something remarkable about them. He and Barbecue resumed their feast. Sushu proposed severing more stalks to construct a pathway, but transitioning between blades would be unattainable. Then Sasheo's eyes illuminated with an emerald tint, and something within him shifted and expanded. An immense power surged through his vessels. The acidic excrement gave him a sensation of flight. He grasped the felled stalk that prevented their plunge, and commenced hoisting it back to its position. This enigmatic surge in his potency was the ideal instrument for his scheme. A lone leap sufficed for him to attain the adjacent stalk. From a distance, Su Xiao promptly commenced fashioning the grassy span. As the remaining group traversed, he felt incredibly well that he might even possess the ability to slay a colossal bovine, perhaps merely a fowl. Regarding fowl, an avian descended from the heavens, misconstruing them as quarry and fractured its talons. Su Xiao bludgeoned the avian repeatedly, instructing it with the avian subdued. He developed a yearning for barbecued wings. For lunch, he might be enthusiastic, but Lu was growing slightly anxious at this abrupt surge in power. She fretted that this bug excrement enhancement could have adverse reactions, just as Suja was on the verge of reassuring her that all was well. His expression twisted into a bizarre frown, and he subsequently fainted. Su Xiao awakened after grilling, placed a couple more blobs of insect droppings in his maw, with people diminishing. Perhaps other beings were also impacted somehow. Like these bugs, he documented this event and designated the treats he was consuming as aggressive insects. There was additionally the parasitic fungus, or Little Red Riding Hood. While they were relaxing, Yongfang proposed the notion of taking a wider path for security, but they couldn't bear to travel the lengthy route. Moreover, traveling main streets would make them vulnerable to stray animals. They had to maintain their path and adjust to any obstacles. Kenshin loathed every aspect of their predicament, and he felt that attaining the illumination would return them to normalcy. Su Xiao truly wished for such simplicity, but merely glimpsing the distant radiance caused him to perceive alluring voices. Beckoning him, they had to traverse the stream, and the wounded avian was attempting to escape. As they formulated their plan, with fractured wings, the bird was simply sustenance. To ford the remaining current, they would require Sasheo's divinely empowered force. He approximated his threshold at roughly 120 seconds, ample time to construct a simple bridge. Su Xiao performed swiftly and adeptly. The final step was to link the felled logs. The crossing was rapidly completed, and he signaled the party to traverse. Unfortunately, the aphid aftereffect activated before Su Xiao could land on the far side. He tumbled, and his form plummeted into the water. Lychee attempted her utmost to retrieve her companion, but she was too tardy luckily. Su Xiao had grown wary over the preceding days, and fastened his middle to the crossing, confirming the crossing's stability. The wounded bird was next in line to go across Xinshuan and Yangfang. Had to prod the avian with a branch to compel it to traverse the stalks. Upon arriving at the opposite side, Lizwei endeavored to domesticate the bird, but it was too haughty. She lacked time to be gentle, so she subdued the hapless creature. They utilized the wounded bird as a steed the remainder of the journey. It might be flightless, but it could still sprint when Su Xiao revived. He was positioned beneath Li Shuai's body. It wasn't the worst spot to be in after a crappy aftermath. He was unconscious so long that dusk began to settle. Their lodging for the night would be the large tree ahead. En route to the next stop, Qian felt an intolerable itch on his back. There were some awful welts emerging from his skin. The group arrived at the giant tree without further incident. When Barbecue and the sparrow could properly engage on solid ground, the bird instantly attacked the lizard. Barbecue was initially puzzled, but then extended his tiny claws. That sparrow conserved the team considerable time and energy by serving as a pack animal. Sadly, it wasn't as bright as Barbecue. We didn't witness the pets brawl, but all you need to know is the bird was scarred. To worsen things, the powerful pair believed the sparrow was the aggressor tonight. Aphid shells were supper. They only possessed 4 full aphid droppings, but Su Xiao planned to collect more. Chun Xin mentioned his back irritation, a nuisance that would keep him awake regardless, so he volunteered for the initial watch. The fellow had demonstrated untrustworthiness in crucial moments, so Barbecue was assigned to stay awake too. All night the jerk vigorously scratched himself. Then he abruptly halted and gradually moved towards the powerful pair. It was after midnight, and Sushio had awakened to begin his shift. Lucky must have detected an approaching threat and arose, lifting her toothpick lance. Once they clearly saw the scoundrel's face, his eyes darted around and his body twitched strangely. Su Xia inquired about the situation with Chun Xian, but the hooligan roared and lunged. One kick repelled his attack. Regardless of the situation, restrained the idiot first. After securing him, Chun Xian writhed on the ground in pain. An intolerable itching consumed him. Su Xia flipped the prisoner to examine Chinchin's back, where fungal indications were festering. If his hunch was correct, it was the parasitic Little Red Riding Hood fungus. In that scenario, Yungfang could be contaminated. Su Xia attempted to rouse her, but it was potentially too late. She already displayed symptoms. The feral cat encounter might have caused their parasitism. They must have breed in a few spores. Yet the powerful pair was unaffected, despite greater spore exposure. If mushroom development relies on the host's well-being, perhaps a surge of energy from the aggressive aphids might diminish the fungal expansion. Another possibility is that the parasite would simply assimilate the aphid's power. It was unfortunately too late for that jerk. Chun Xin's entire rear end exploded, releasing a multitude of fungal parasites. If they didn't want Yungfang to share the same gruesome end, they needed to accelerate the aphid strategy. She was suffering greatly, but faced with a tough decision. Yungfang opted to gamble on the aphrodescence. Once the droppings were integrated into her system, an internal transformation commenced. Before Xu Xia could respond, the enhanced Yungfang was already grasping his throat with extraordinary strength. He attempted to communicate with her, but there was nothing but emptiness in those luminous green eyes. Zhangfang proceeded to try and bite his neck. She would have removed a substantial piece if Li Jiu hadn't yanked her away by her hair, while the powerful pair were squabbling. Zhangfang seized Su Xiao and hurled him towards his companion. The hurl was so forceful the impact almost fractured the earth. She was mightier than Su Xia with the acid boost, but since she was tainted by the fungus, she should be feeble enough to ignite right. Knowing her flaw was pointless if it didn't halt her assault. Fortunately, Su Xia was propelled near the bonfire and instantly headed for the blaze. He brandished a torch and she retreated. He was certain he found the solution, but Yungfang just knocked the torch from his hand. Out of options, Su Xiao knelt and attempted to divert zombie Yungfang's focus to the bird and its tasty flesh, but her objective was Su Xiao. Not even a covert toothpick projectile would deter her. She seemed to have ultra instinct, snatching the incoming strike barehanded. Then she utilized the captured arrow to assault Su Xiao. He aimed to mimic her and seize the toothpick. He succeeded, but the propulsion was immense. It knocked him off his feet. For a second, it seemed the powerful pair was finished. Sushio hoped Barbecue would be wise enough to flee. A sudden burst of dark powder disrupted the assault. Once the powder cleared, 2 luminous eyes appeared. It was a giant crimson lizard, and it was aiming its aggression at zombie Jiangfang. The pair were clueless about this creature, but it was swift and powerful enough to match the energized zombie. They had to seize this opportunity to escape. The lizard had the advantage, forcing the zombie into desperation. When Yungfang attempted to strike its body, the beast countered with a tail lash. Then it fiercely lunged, only to have all momentum drained upon absorbing a kick. The second kick was a decisive blow to the side. These 2 otherworldly beings were in a stalemate. An undead Yungfang bolted. She melted into the night shadows and vanished to parts unknown. Mr. Red Lizard searched but couldn't follow. Meanwhile, the pair escaped as far as possible. They were distant enough to recover and treat their grave wounds, but with their exceptional constitutions, healing shouldn't be an issue. Their sole worry was the absent Barbecue. Unbeknownst to the 2, menacing reptilian eyes lurked nearby. Su Xia scanned the vicinity and detected a rustle. He investigated, hoping it was Barbecue. Sadly for him, it was another reptile, a different serpent seeking prey. Li Shui responded instantly when she spotted the predator near her companion. She seized his hand, and fled. There were several near misses, but Su Xiao narrowly avoided death repeatedly. When it came close enough to strike a fatal blow, the earlier crimson reptile emerged and foiled the serpent's attempt at a human meal. Instead of devouring miniaturized people, the serpent endured a painful bite. The scarlet lizard was resilient and fierce, forcing the snake to yield with its bite. He concluded the battle by knotting the hapless snake's form. Then the crimson reptile experienced similar symptoms that Su Xiao endured. With intense aphid ingestion, suddenly grilling chirps became noticeable. When the pair investigated the origin, they discovered the infant lizard unconscious in a glade. The tiny creature was motionless, which concerned the pair. At least you assumed Barbecue simply fainted from fright, but we are more informed than that. They couldn't help but admire the power of that scarlet reptile that bound the serpent like a ribbon. With that resolved, they had to gather their belongings and see if the sparrow lived. Luckily, the bird remained tied at their campsite, alongside all their provisions. Finding their transportation alive brought relief, but the small bird looked spooked upon seeing Barbecue. The sparrow realized Barbecue and the red lizard were identical. He wouldn't challenge that adorable baby reptile again. Fortunately, they had all their gear, including the volatile AF supplies. They crafted a headstall for the bird for a smoother trip. It was behaving perfectly. Su Xiao mounted the bird and got comfy behind Li Shuai. She placed their belongings in the center to keep our guy at a distance. Upon leaving the zone, undead Jiangfeng emerged from the darkness. Meantime, another band of miniaturized survivors encountered the enormous Red Riding Hood from the encampment. This crew was actively hunting for Su Xiao and the squad for their immense capability. In their mission to locate the powerful pair, they would have to confront the amplified, infected walker known as Jiangfeng. This bunch wasn't composed of amateurs. They repelled a flawless surprise assault. Yet the enhanced walker was simply too formidable and swift. The group's solution was to deploy the improvised fire gun. Jiangfeng was caught unaware and yielded to the inferno instantly. The crew's commander was unfazed by the assault. He simply aimed to reach their true target. Once they began to relax their vigilance, things altered. Walker Jiangfeng was durable enough to withstand the blaze and reduce the gap to demolish the fire gun. After obliterating the instrument, she focused on the individual it was attached to. To her astonishment, her impeccable motion was halted by a mighty blade swing. The crew's chief reacted quicker than she could manage, rescuing his teammate. This allowed them to overwhelm the tainted woman. She utilized the force of the dodge to launch herself back. Her goal was to command the abundant Red Riding Hood blossoms left by Shinshin's remains. The reanimated didn't even graze the fungal mass, and its crimson nodes began exploding. Sequentially, it scattered the scarlet spores. Jiangfeng used this as effective concealment while escaping. The squad shielded their mouths and noses just in time. Their tracker observed the zombified woman carried the same scent as the spores. The commander chose not to pursue. Their efforts were better used on their true objective. Gentlemen, the Pathfinder was certain locating the pair would be easy, utilizing the sparrow as a grounded steed. The duo's advancement was quite swift. Liash ceased their advance, noticing a snare, suggesting someone was camped ahead. As always, Su Xiao was designated to venture out, to welcome the newcomers as merrily as possible. The straw-clad individuals swiftly brandished their arms. They were wary. Su Xiao reassured them he intended no trouble, and simply wondered if they could briefly share campsites. The elder man inquired how Su Xiao evaded the tripwires. They placed effectively. He's fallen prey to one himself, and his companion is adept at rigging them. Observing the straw men were amenable, Su Xiao beckoned Li Shuai forth, but she erupted from the foliage due to an aggressive presence. Their pursuers had overtaken them, and now targeted Li Shuai, too. She cautioned her partner these hunters were formidable and driven. They materialized rapidly. Barbecue lacked time for a warning. The elder straw figure named Wang guaranteed he'd handle the pursuers. His plan was to sit and discuss. Initially, when the hunters rejected peace and assaulted instead, Wang simply seized the approaching weapon barehanded, shielded in scales. The hunter chief disliked the appearance of those scales. It became a clash between Wang and the hunter captain. It wasn't much of a confrontation. The hunter boss was too swift and ferocious. He clutched Wang's neck and sunk his vampire teeth into the artery. Wang attempted to resist, but all his energy was depleted. The scales on his hands vanished, and the leader discarded his lifeless form, griping it was too oily. Post-bite, the vampire could now encase his skin in scales. He was a vampire who could assimilate others' powers, and now he aimed to make Li Shuai his vampire spouse. The superhuman pair attempted their standard attack combo, but countering them was effortless for the vampire hunter. The man ignored Su Xiao and targeted the woman directly. Amidst the pandemonium, Barbecue concealed himself in the leaves, trying to extract honeydew from the aphids. The pair dispatched the other two hunters with ease, but the leader was a formidable opponent. He pulled Su Xiao toward Li Shuai to force him to observe her being completely drained. The vampire ensured he would see every moment of this wickedness. Even if he desired action, he was powerless. At that moment, the vampire's blood meal was disrupted by the arrival of the Scarlet Lizard. Barbecue's enhanced state. He understood the gravity of this battle. For his survival, the vampire attacked first and was swiftly subdued. He refused to submit to a mere creature, but he couldn't raise his head. Barbecue observed his friend in a pitiful condition, repeatedly slammed the vampire's head against the ground. Fueled by rage, he persisted until the seemingly invincible foe collapsed unconscious. Before blacking out, Su Xiao finally grasped that the red lizard they were eating was Barbecue. The whole time he re-entered the dream realm, the alluring voice revealed his innermost yearning dominance, strength to shield his comrades from peril and agony. His dream offered a solution to that longing. The white particles suspended around him. This was the remedy for his helplessness. When the white particles contacted his hand, it released a dazzling radiance and jolted him away. So Shu observed his environment, grateful to be alive. Li Shu crafted a wooden support for his fractured arm, and it seemed neither of them was severely injured. Presently, the formidable innkeeper was questioning the captured hunters. Upon regaining consciousness, the trio discovered themselves near death on the ground. She tied them up during questioning. The pair addressed the blade's menace to the boss. The jester readily confessed he could draw the blood of remarkable people to copy their talents. They had been following the two for their first-rate physique. The higher the physique rank, the bigger the gains for absorbing. Currently, the Bloodsucker Hunter was at level 3. Getting to level 3 gave him a new outlook on the world. While spilling the beans, he gradually incinerated his bonds. Although being grilled, the rascal boldly tried to charm Li Shuai. As the restraints completely burned off, the leech rapidly flipped the script and grabbed Li Shuai by the throat, menacing to squeeze her trachea. This time he expected to gorge himself fully. However, Sushio felt the sting of his powerlessness welling up inside him, and an enigmatic force started to gather in his arm. As the bloodsucker continued bragging about his upcoming feast, Sushio seized the moment to mentally manipulate the dagger behind him, making it ascend and pierce the vampire's core. It was a single-strike, instant-kill maneuver that left Su Xiao utterly drained. Miles away in the same woods, a contemplative elder sensed the power unleashed by the youth. In his time of need, he deduced that someone had just employed something called the Prime Spirit. The old man rapidly descended from his meditation place, alighting as gently as a feather. A young man greeted him as Grandpa Ni, although he favored being called Senior. Grandpa Ni told the young man he had an assignment to finish and would be back once it was completed. The remainder of their party currently roasting a rat voiced anxieties about their security now that Grandpa Ni was gone. A collective of individuals with distinct talents. They assured themselves they would be all right. Meanwhile, the superpowered pair continued their healing process. Su Xiao's recently discovered special skill was clearly connected to the white speck flashes he had seen in the dreamscape. He understood the solutions to his countless inquiries could only be located in that bright chamber. While stuck in the dream realm, he tried to command the glimmers to merge with him, and they obeyed. This action also occurred in reality. His nose bled and strange sparkles seeped from his head. It required effort, but he integrated every shimmer in the dream world. After waking, everything appeared normal. Su Xiao was urged to contemplate, as the haze inside him started shifting systematically, aiding his recuperation. A majority of the flickers gathered in his mind. While he was engrossed in examining the enigma of strength, the other pursuers awoke and desired vengeance. To hush their constant babble, Su Xiao opened his eyes and, with his thoughts, wielded a dagger, flinging it at the hunters, and halting it mere inches from slaying one. The hunters finally fled in fear. Su Xiao felt that telekinesis was just a shallow use of the enigmatic power inside him. He believed there was more to this skill to ponder. Maybe his newfound talent was connected to the reduction event. Meanwhile, Grandpa Ni soared, scouting the zone, masterfully locating the origin of the main spirit. He met undead Jiang Feng and easily defeated the seemingly indestructible beast. With a single lightning bolt, he quickly found Su Xiao. Gramps touched down and shortened the gap effortlessly, then confined our kid in a dirt jail. The ground quickly solidified, trapping the youth in a prison as he tried to break the barrier with a sword. In return, Grampany conjured a flawlessly carved dragon head, propelling the stone forward like a genuine legendary beast. It wrapped around Su Xiao. His powerful struggle resonated. Grandpa and I was amazed by the youngster's handling of his assaults. Rarely does someone have such an unspoken comprehension of the Imperial Sword's enchantment. He wanted to evaluate Su Xiao, but almost perished from a hurled dagger. The elder explained he intended no injury. When questioned about his name, Grandpa Ni maintained it was needless. He visited to meet the gifted person chosen by the master. Grandpa Ni, directed by his deity, guided the pair swiftly to his encampment for clarification. With his impeccable magical command, the elder lifted the two and the grill in his ascent, displaying one application of the fundamental spirit. But Su Xiao's royal blade designated him a prodigy. Su Xiao possessed the capacity to become an illuminated soul, transcending awareness limits and embracing the complete benediction of the primeval spirit. The journey was brief. Elder and I directed the group to ascend to the upper level, where the master awaited in the enigmatic edifice with the radiance. Was the encampment Elder and I mentioned? Below the aperture lay a mysterious human colony. Grandpain's objective was accomplished. His sole duty was to convey the talented Su Xiao. With his mission fulfilled, Elder and I succumbed to the earth. As the inhabitants clarified, the senior citizen had rejoined the source. The sovereign guided surviving people to this location through diverse approaches. But Su Xiao was unique. He was exceptional after reaching the second story. They entered a bazaar-like zone. Near the barriers, vendors of assorted wares and services overwhelmed them, swiftly dispersed by one of the sovereign's retinue. The disciple guaranteed Su Xiao that after encountering the master, lodging and journey would be handled, and even Li Shui and Barbecue could explore the area unrestricted. Su Xiao was guided toward a colossal entrance, the throng trailing anxious for the display. The cloaked attendant contacted the gateway. An amber electrical power dispersed around its exterior. It opened, gradually exposing a welcoming glow. Sosa understood he must proceed regardless. Within was an orb of pure energy, mimicking the sun, encompassed by gold flecks of power, similar to the flashes in his slumber. The ethereal tone from his dream realm kindly greeted him. This sun sphere was the sovereign, admiring Su Xiao's aptitude and character, desiring someone like him for an extended period. The gold particles elevated Su Xiao skyward, as the sovereign vowed to disclose the reality, proffering a portion of his fear form straight into the youth's psyche. He witnessed images of individuals in prayer and dedicating themselves to the radiant glow, illuminating the sky as worshippers rejoiced in triumph, unlocking access to the celestial realm, and claiming Earth as their 32nd domain. When the Supreme Being rose, the laws governing interdimensional merging shifted drastically, leading to a fragile form requiring substitution. A mortal shell proved most suitable, its sentience immense despite diminished size. The Almighty crafted automatons to seek a unique spirit, discovering Su Xiao the ideal receptacle. This merging would amplify the Supreme Being's power, guaranteeing all ambitions. Nevertheless, as the Lord's circular essence integrated with Su Xiao, the divine entity felt alarm, and his celestial energy overwhelmed and consumed the deities. Disciples gathered to observe the spectacle at the holy grounds. When the portal opened, everyone instinctively recoiled, awestruck by the youth suspended midair. Immersed in a golden radiance, his eyes shimmered gold. Motionless, his disciples intoned a greeting to their master. Li Shui and Barbecue landed in a surprising predicament. The alleged leader had an inquiry for Li Shui if she located a decent eatery because he was famished.